At a high-profile political gathering, tensions rose when U.S. Congresswoman Maxine Waters tried to belittle Ibrahim Traore, the young president of Burkina Faso. The audience expected him to stay quiet, but instead Traore calmly revealed a shocking family secret connected to Waters that left the crowd gasping. What began as a clash of words quickly escalated into one of the most unforgettable exchanges ever witnessed on a public stage. The room erupted, and the world hasn't stopped talking about it since. The Grand Hall in Washington, D.C. glittered with chandeliers and cameras. Leaders, diplomats, and journalists from across the world filled every seat. It was meant to be a night of speeches about cooperation and peace, but the mood was uneasy. Whispers filled the air as everyone waited for President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso to speak. He was young, calm, and carried himself with quiet strength. Many in the audience admired him, though some doubted him. As he rose from his chair, a sudden voice cut through the hall. Congresswoman Maxine Waters leaned toward her microphone. Her tone was sharp, almost mocking. "What wisdom," she said, "can a boy leading one of the poorest nations possibly bring us tonight?" The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in, heads turned. Some gasped at her words. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Traore did not flinch. He simply stood, his eyes steady. His silence held more weight than any insult. Everyone waited. What would he say? For a long moment, the hall remained frozen. Maxine Waters smirked, convinced she had embarrassed Traore before the world. Many in the crowd expected him to avoid conflict, to smile politely and move on. But Traore's lips curved in the faintest smile, not of weakness, but of patience. He adjusted the microphone. His deep voice rang clear. "Madam Congresswoman," he began softly, "sometimes wisdom does not come from age or wealth. It comes from truth, and truth has a way of finding us." The crowd leaned forward. His calmness was disarming. Waters crossed her arms, ready for a fight. Then he paused. His eyes scanned the audience before returning to hers. "You speak of me as if I am far from you. But history often ties strangers closer than they think." Confusion rippled through the hall. Cameras flashed. His words were measured but heavy. Journalists scribbled furiously, sensing a storm coming. Maxine Waters shifted uncomfortably. Something in his tone suggested he knew more than he should. The hall seemed to shrink as Traore's voice deepened. "Congresswoman, do you remember the name Joseph Coleman?" Waters froze. Her smile vanished. The name struck her like thunder. A murmur spread across the audience. Traore continued his words steady. "Decades ago, Joseph Coleman traveled through West Africa. He left behind not just memories, but blood. That blood runs in my country. It runs in families your own kin may not wish to remember." The audience gasped. Reporters nearly jumped from their chairs. Waters' hands trembled on the table. Her eyes darted as though searching for escape. "This is not about shame," Traore added gently. "It is about truth. And tonight truth is what we owe the world." Silence followed. The weight of his words pressed down on every chest in the room. People who came expecting politics were now witnesses to history. Cameras captured Watt's pale face and Traore's calm, almost sorrowful gaze. The first crack in the night had appeared. The crowd knew this was only the beginning. The silence in the hall shattered as whispers turned into a wave of murmurs. Some audience members leaned over to one another asking, "Who is Joseph Coleman?" Others typed frantically on their phones, sending messages to editors and colleagues. The name was already making its way across social media. Maxine Waters' composure cracked. She forced a laugh, but it fell flat. The tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Mr. Traore," she said, "you are mistaken. I don't know what you're talking about." Traore did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her with the steady eyes of a man unafraid of truth. History cannot be denied. Madam, the past always leaves its fingerprints. Gasps rippled through the hall again. The young president was not attacking. He was unveiling something much deeper. The crowd could feel it. Something hidden was coming to the surface, and no one could stop it. Waters gripped the edge of the table in front of her. The world's cameras caught every tremble, every shadow crossing her face. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News outlets replayed the clip on loop. Headlines screamed, "Traore confronts Waters with shocking name." Hashtags exploded. By dawn, journalists were already digging. Within hours, an old set of travel documents surfaced, passport records, faded letters, even photographs. They linked a man named Joseph Coleman to West Africa in the 1970s. The evidence was undeniable. One document carried his signature alongside a reference to a small town in Burkina Faso. Another showed his name tied to relatives in America. Crowds gathered outside news stations demanding answers. The connection was no longer just rumor. It was fact. Meanwhile, Traore remained calm. He did not call press conferences. He did not boast. He stayed in his hotel room, speaking softly with close aides, insisting, "This is not about humiliation. It is about healing. Truth must guide us." Waters, however, was cornered. Her office released a statement denying any ties, but the denials only fueled more suspicion. People wanted the truth, and they wanted it now. On the second day, under pressure from both allies and critics, Maxine Waters agreed to face Traore again. The organizers of the gathering arranged a private meeting, but nothing about it stayed private. Reporters lined the streets. Protesters carried signs demanding honesty. Inside a quiet conference room, Waters entered first. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Minutes later, Traore walked in, calm and composed, dressed in a simple dark suit. She wasted no time. "You embarrassed me before the world," she snapped. "Whatever game you are playing, stop." Traore sat down slowly, his hands folded on the table. "This is no game," he said softly. "The past connects us more than you know. You carry a story in your family that touches my people directly." Waters's jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked as if she might walk out. But something in Traore's tone, steady, sorrowful, yet unyielding, kept her rooted. The cameras outside caught none of this, but the tension inside was enough to shake the building. The truth was circling closer, and soon the world would hear it. By the third evening, the gathering felt less like a diplomatic event and more like a storm brewing. Reporters camped outside Ibrahim Traore's hotel, shouting questions each time he appeared. Crowds gathered with flags of Burkina Faso, chanting his name. Inside, the air was heavy. Aides warned Traore that the situation was becoming dangerous, but he remained calm. "When truth arrives," he said quietly, "fear has no place." In another wing of the same hotel, Maxine Waters was restless. She walked the hallway at midnight, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low but trembling. "They found the papers," she whispered. "If this continues, my family's name will be dragged through fire." What she didn't know was that one of the journalists nearby overheard. Within hours, social media carried the leak. Maxine Waters admits fear of documents. The pressure doubled. The world was watching. The walls were closing in. The following morning, a respected historian stepped forward with something no one expected. A letter yellowed with time written by Joseph Coleman himself. The letter spoke of his travels through Burkina Faso, where he described a friendship with a local family. His words were affectionate, personal, and carried a confession. "In this land, I leave behind more than memories. I leave behind my own flesh and blood." The revelation shook journalists and leaders alike. If true, The implication was stunning. Maxine Waters' family carried a connection to the very nation she had tried to dismiss. Traore, when shown the letter, did not celebrate. Instead, he bowed his head. "This is not about scandal," he told aides. "This is about dignity for my people and for hers." But for Waters, the letter was a knife to the heart. She locked herself away, avoiding cameras. Her closest allies urged her to respond. Still, she stayed silent. On the fourth day, the organizers of the gathering announced a surprise. Ibrahim Traore would return to the main stage, this time for an open forum. The hall filled faster than before. Journalists jostled for position. Politicians leaned forward in their seats. Everyone knew that the letter had changed everything. When Traore stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. He did not raise his hands. Instead, he waited for silence. His words were calm, almost fatherly. "Truth is not a weapon," he said softly. "It is a mirror. We must look into it even when it hurts." The cameras turned to Maxine Waters, who had reluctantly agreed to attend. Her eyes were glassy, her hands clenched in her lap. Traore paused, then added, "When family secrets cross borders, they remind us that humanity is one family, even when we try to deny it." The hall erupted in gasps and applause. It was no longer politics. It was something deeply human. The open forum was supposed to last an hour. It stretched into 3. Every question circled back to the same topic. The letter, the name Joseph Coleman, and the connection no one could ignore. Maxine Waters sat stiffly, her eyes darting whenever the microphones turned toward her. The pressure was unbearable. Finally, a young student from Africa stood up. His voice trembled, but his words cut through the air. "Congresswoman, if the letter is true, then part of your blood is part of us. Why do you deny us with such anger?" The hall fell silent. Waters' lips quivered. For the first time, tears glistened in her eyes. Cameras zoomed in. Her shoulders slumped as though the weight of decades had finally landed. Traore remained silent. He simply looked at her, not with triumph, but with a quiet sorrow. His restraint spoke louder than any speech. The audience could feel it. This was no longer about politics. It was about identity, history, and wounds that had been ignored for too long. That night, whispers turned into headlines. Some claimed Waters was seen leaving the hall in tears. Others said she was overheard telling aides, "It was hidden from me all my life. I didn't want the world to know." In her hotel room, she finally broke down. The cameras weren't there, but her closest staff saw it. The trembling hands, the silent sobs, the whispered words. "My grandfather, it's true." For Ibrahim Traore, the night was different. He knelt alone by his bedside whispering prayers. His advisors urged him to push harder, to let the world celebrate his victory. But he shook his head. "This is not about victory. This is about mending hearts broken before we were even born." Outside, protesters held candles in the street. Some were American, some African, but together they chanted, "Truth heals." The scene was broadcast worldwide. Millions watched with tears streaming down their faces. On the 6th day, the organizers arranged one final gathering. Everyone knew it would be decisive. The room was charged with emotion. Some expected Waters to resign. Others expected Traore to expose even more. When he walked to the stage, the applause was heavy with respect. He lifted his hand, calling for silence. His words were simple, spoken slowly so no one could miss their weight. "Family secrets are not curses. They are bridges. We must decide whether to burn them or walk across them together." The hall erupted in applause. Even those who had doubted him now leaned forward with admiration. Cameras caught Waters pressing a tissue to her eyes, unable to stop her tears. Then Traore did something no one expected. He turned toward her, bowed slightly, and said, "Madam, you are not my enemy. You are my sister. Let us not run from what binds us. Let us face it together." The crowd gasped, then rose in a thunderous standing ovation. Some wept openly. In that moment, history felt rewritten, not with anger, but with grace. By the seventh day, the story had gone beyond the walls of the conference. Networks from every continent broadcast live updates. Outside, thousands held banners that read, "Truth unites and one family, one humanity." Under this global pressure, Maxine Waters agreed to appear before the press. Her voice was shaky. Her hands clutched the podium. "All my life," she began, "I believe my family story was one thing, but now with what has come to light, I must face the possibility that it is something more." Reporters leaned forward, holding their breath. Waters swallowed hard. If what President Traore revealed is true, then a part of me belongs to the very land I mocked. And for that, I am deeply ashamed. The hall grew silent. It wasn't just an apology. It was a confession. Cameras captured her trembling tears. Across the world, millions watched, some crying along with her. Later that evening, Traore requested a small gathering in the same hall. Unlike the loud sessions before, this one was intimate. No podium, no barriers, just chairs in a circle. Waters was invited, hesitant, but present. He spoke gently. "We cannot choose our ancestors, but we can choose what their legacy will mean." Then, to the shock of everyone, he stood and walked toward her. Extending his hand, he said, "You are not alone. Your story is now ours. Let us carry it with dignity, not shame." The cameras caught the moment. Traore's hand outstretched, Watt's eyes filling again. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. The room burst into applause. Not polite claps, but thunderous emotional roars. For many, it was more than a gesture. It was forgiveness, leadership, and courage wrapped in one act. People in the hall cried openly. Viewers at home felt goosebumps run down their arms. When the images hit the screens, the world erupted. On the streets of Ouagadougou, young people danced and sang. In New York, strangers embraced on sidewalks as giant screens replayed the moment. Inside the hall, something even more powerful happened. A woman from the audience stood and spoke through her tears. "My father also hid his past. For years, I carried anger. But tonight I feel healing." Others joined one after another, sharing personal stories of hidden family secrets. Lost siblings, buried histories, forgotten connections. Each story drew more tears. Each word showing how deeply Traore's message touched people beyond politics. Through it all, Traore listened quietly, his face solemn, his heart heavy yet proud. He was not simply a leader. He had become a bridge between two worlds. Maxine Waters sat beside him, tears streaking her face. For the first time, she whispered into the microphone, "Thank you, brother." The hall shook with applause, many unable to hold back sobs. The world had just witnessed not only truth, but reconciliation. The seventh evening of the gathering arrived, and the hall was once again packed. Everyone knew something extraordinary was about to happen. The atmosphere was heavy yet hopeful. As Ibrahim Traore stepped forward, the crowd hushed instantly. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked at Maxine Waters, then at the audience as though weighing the moment. Finally, he walked toward her, slow and steady. The cameras followed every move. Gasps echoed when, instead of more words, Traore opened his arms. For a brief second, silence held its breath. Then, Waters' trembling rose from her chair and fell into his embrace. The hall erupted. Some clapped, others cried openly. The embrace lasted longer than anyone expected. It wasn't political. It was human, raw, and real. People around the world watched, tears streaming down their faces. Commentators later admitted they had never seen such humility and courage on a public stage. That embrace wasn't just between two leaders. It was between two histories, two continents, and two truths that had finally found each other. The moment spread like fire. Screens in New York, Paris, Lagos, and Ouagadougou replayed the image of Traore and Waters embracing. Hashtags exploded. Be Truth unites. Brother and sister, one family. In Burkina Faso, crowds filled the streets singing songs of unity. In America, vigils were held outside Congress with candles glowing through the night. Commentators on every network spoke of healing, courage, and a new kind of leadership. But what moved people most wasn't politics. It was the humanity. Traore's calm grace in the face of insult, his choice of compassion over revenge, and his reminder that hidden family ties can unite rather than divide. Waters, once rigid with denial, now wept openly beside him in public. She admitted her family had concealed parts of their history, but she promised to face it with honesty. That night, the world didn't talk about shame. They talked about forgiveness, and Ibrahim Traore's name became a symbol of hope carried on the lips of millions. On the last day, as the gathering drew to a close, Traore gave a final speech. The room was silent, every heart waiting for his words. Leaders are not measured by how loud they shout, but by how deeply they heal. We cannot run from the past, but we can walk together into a future where no one is ashamed of their roots. Tonight, we have seen that family extends beyond borders. Tonight, the world has learned that forgiveness is stronger than pride. The hall rose in a standing ovation. Some clapped with shaking hands. Others wiped their tears. Even those watching from home felt as though they had been part of something larger than life. Waters, still emotional, whispered into her microphone, "Thank you, President Traore. You have given me back my humanity." As the ovation thundered on, the world knew history had been made. Now, my dear viewers, if this story moved you to tears, if it touched your heart the way it touched mine, don't just sit back. Hit that subscribe button to join this family. Smash the like button to spread this message of truth and forgiveness. And most importantly, drop a comment. Tell us what part of this story touched you the most. Your words matter. Your voice matters. And together we can keep stories like this